Good morning, Coalition. It's great to see everybody today. We've got a great group here, and we have a wonderful interview with our very own Keith Steyerwalt, and he is going to be joining us for our Friday Facts, this wonderful, warm and clear Friday morning. So it's good to see everyone. And I'm going to ask our lovely Allison if she has any announcements to make.
Hey everyone. Good morning and happy Friday. I just have two quick announcements today. The first one, just a reminder that our full coalition meeting is next Friday. Please let me know if you have any additional questions about that meeting, or if you need me to resend you the calendar invite, I'd be happy to do so. The second announcement that I have is save the date, because there is a clinical practice forum on March 26th at noon. I will put that date in the chat. And because it is Social Workers Month, we are doing a special forum involving a panelist of social workers. So I will put more information in the chat. Look for a flyer next week, but save the date. That is March 26th for the 4th Clinical Practice Forum. Thank you, David, and welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Allison. And I think we have at least one of our panelists for next week's Clinical Practice Forum online right now, Karen Bullock, Dr. Bullock. So
2 weeks, not next week, 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks, I'm sorry, that's right. My goodness. Anyway, that's great. So again, welcome to everybody, and welcome Keith. So we've got a few minutes here to learn a little bit more about who Keith Steyerwalt is. So Keith, tell us a little bit about, where you grew up, and a little bit more about who you are as a person, please.
Well, good morning, and thank you, by the way, for asking me to do this. I appreciate it very much. I grew up in throughout the South in a way that sounds like I was a military family, but actually had a father who was very early in what was then called data processing. Back when you walked into computers, you literally walked inside of them. They contain rooms, and so we moved every 3 or 4 years on average, and that may be being kind. And so I ended up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I did my undergraduate in chemistry, with the intent of going on and getting at least a master's, if not a PhD, in forensic chemistry. And this was way before forensic chemistry was a sexy thing. There were no television shows about forensics. It was nerd supreme.
Now, Keith, you got to tell us what forensic chemistry is.
At that time, and things have changed. So forensic chemistry really was about using analytical chemistry methods in a forensic capacity, meaning in this case, primarily law enforcement. Everything from identifying what an explosive was and where it was made to blood type. At that time it was almost broken down to blood typing of things from crime scenes. So it certainly wasn't as near as sophisticated as it is now. And as I told David yesterday, I went to an American Chemical Society meeting and ran into a lot of chemical salespeople who had PhDs in forensic chemistry. And when I asked them why, because I found that disturbing, they said you can't live in Washington, D.C. for what at that time was about $12,000 a year and feed your family. And I thought, maybe I need to do something different. Well, I was almost done. And a friend and colleague at the hospital in Chattanooga told me about physician assistants. Never heard of them. Almost on impulse, thought, well, I'll do that. And I had run into physicians over the years when I worked in the hospital, since I've been in since 1978, who said, the problem with these administrators is they don't know what it's like to practice medicine. And so they make really bad decisions. And I got to be in meetings with administrators who said, the problem with these physicians is they don't know what it's like to have to get money to pay people. And so they make really bad decisions. And so I decided I'd be the peace child, go to the PA program. here in Winston-Salem, by the way, at what was then called Bowman Gray, and then get an MBA. And I was going to be the peace child, bringing everyone together in peace and harmony. The first couple of things happened. I did end up getting both of those degrees. The peace and harmony thing never occurred under my watch.
Is it still, Keith?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. I run into lots of clinicians with business degrees now, and I still I actually watch them kind of spin in the middle. So I'm not sure that we have reached that eschatological land of peace and harmony. And you know, maybe that's the heat that drives that makes steam that goes into the boiler. Who knows? But I don't. Maybe I'll live long enough to see that. We'll find out. I actually worked with and for a physician in my first practice, a general practice, who had an issue with substance abuse, which caused me to need to find another job, to be honest with you. And I went to work for an urgent care group back when urgent cares were considered the bottom feeders, to be honest with you, of medicine. That's, we joked about people who worked there. Well, when you're a newlywed and you need to find another job, and there weren't a lot of PA jobs back then, suddenly your lens changes. And I went to work at an urgent care center, got my MBA, and actually then moved into medical administration and specialized in occupational medicine, specifically substance abuse testing. And to be frank with you, we made more money off of golden fluid than we made off of family practice. That's where the real money was.
That's where the gold was.
Yeah. So when the physicians would complain about the drug screens getting in the way, their nurses weren't able to help, I would remind them of the bonuses they got and the stream of money, where that stream, the stream that brought that stream of money. We were purchased by Novant Health. I know we've got some Novant Health folks here as well. And I put in about 16 and a half years, really burned out. There's no nice way to put it. I was, the flames were flickering at that time. Remembered an earlier call to the ministry, and have a wife who's understanding in so many ways that we don't have time to even touch on. But she and I talked, and I recalled an earlier call to ministry, quit making decent money and power, and went back to divinity school at Wake Forest, because Wake Forest needed more money from me. I don't guess they got enough the first time. And so went through, but my intent was to, again, come back into the corporate medicine world, because I was very comfortable there, and to be a part-time or even unpaid minister, helping out a church. That was what I wanted to do. And, but developed an interest in ethics, and ended up coming and doing an internship in ethics here at Wake Forest. Someone who's no longer here. Actually, by the way, I've been here 9 years today as an employee, but he kept saying, you ought to look into chaplaincy. And I thought, why would I want to do that? And eventually thought, well, I will do an internship, convinced that I was going to be God's gift to chaplaincy. And all those words are very purposeful, because I'm a medical person. I used to cut people out of cars. By God, these folks are lucky. They're lucky I'm willing to come train here. I was wrong once again, but wrong in a good way. And so decided to apply, and did a year of residency, which is a not very highly paid position where you work a lot, but learn a lot. And about halfway through, actually told the people who were training me here, you'd have to be an idiot to do a second year here. And so I did a second year of residency here, maybe proving the point, and really just fell in love with chaplaincy. Folks at Novant Health had been calling me, asking me to come back as soon as I was done. When are you going to be finished? And that was 2008. And for those of us old enough to remember what happened to our retirement accounts in 2008, it wasn't pretty. The economy dropped, and the people who'd been calling me at Novant no longer knew who I was. Some of them were no longer there. And I was actually without a job between August of that year and March of the next year. again, never really wanting to be a church minister. I'm a bit salty for a church minister, but sometimes you do things. And so I joined on the staff of a church and was the associate pastor and administrator for 3 years until a position came open at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, and I came screaming and begging back. I love the church. I love most of the people I worked with, but I miss my sick people. And sick people and the stories that they tell, I realized that's where I wanted to be. I made the horrific mistake, a mistake that I actually teach PA students about when I talk to them, of letting my license go, because I was never going to go back to it. That was colossal. I see some head shaking. That was colossally dumb, wasn't it? So my vice president, Gary Gunderson, who you may get a chance to meet in weeks to come, said we need a medical person in our division. And so I went back and started almost over, going to CME, and took my boards again and actually passed them fairly handily and convinced the North Carolina Board of Medical Examiner, North Carolina Medical Board is what they're called now, to let me relicense. And I relicensed and recredentialed with the intent of spending most of my time in most type and advanced care planning type conversations when I did clinical work. In the meantime, I got involved in medical education at the med school in a first and second year medical school class that's ethics related, and I teach more at the PA school, and ironically have not had time to fulfill any clinical duties for the palliative care folks. So this is not where I had planned to be even 3 or 4 years ago, but I'm in a space that I really love. I don't get to see patients either as a chaplain or as a PA very much. I saw as a patient as a chaplain yesterday, and again got to listen to someone's story. And I woke up this morning thinking about that time with this man who's quite ill, and realizing that while our stories are a product of our lives, when we get close to the end of life, our stories actually end up informing our end of life, or can. And what a precious space that was. So that's Keith in a nutshell from a vocational sense. It may be more than people wanted to know.
I don't think so, Keith. I think that's a fascinating story. And I think you are a storyteller. And that's probably going back to your ministry roots. I think you mentioned that you were actually thinking about being a minister way, way early when you were a young child.
At the age of 13, going through confirmation in the Methodist Church. I was raised Lutheran, by the way, and we moved to places where they didn't know what Lutherans were. They were awfully suspicious. It sounded suspicious. Well, we became episodic Methodists, which is so I'm ecumenical. I'm actually a Moravian now, although I'm a Baptist minister, so that should confuse all of us. But at the age of 13, told my mother, I want to be a minister. And her answer was very quick. She said, no, ministers are poor and they have no social standing. And she was right on both counts, by the way. But yet that call, just like the call to medicine with me, stayed. It was admittedly was dormant through the college years. The desert of criticism, as some theologians call it. But the meaning making that occurs in medicine and occurs as a theologian, to me, really coalesce really well in a neat space. So my favorite thing to teach has to do with honoring patient spirituality in the clinical space. And at the same time, medical professionals honoring their own spirituality for 2 reasons. One, I meet way too many people for whom, no matter what their religious background is, things just get blown apart when an 8-year-old dies in front of them, which makes me sad. And again, as y'all know, hospital chaplains, we don't care what religion, we don't care if you have a religion. Our job is to focus and support your spirituality. By the way, even if your theological views are ones that we find to be something we would not want ourselves, I'm being very delicate there, but the ability to be in that space is great. But I find way too many medical professionals who lose their spiritual sense because they can't make sense of the mayhem that they see. And so I want them to be aware of that lens, not only because they need to protect their own spirituality, but because frequently we in medicine tend to think we're pretty smart. And as I mentioned yesterday, we think we carry around stone tablets with 10 magic sentences on them. And I'm no different. We need to realize that our lens can affect how we receive and perceive the patient's spirituality, which is most important. So I hear accidental and sometimes on purpose our attempt to thrust our theological views onto patients, and I think that is abuse. And so that's one of the things that I'm very proud that our training program for our chaplains. By the way, I don't train our chaplains. I get to train med students and PA students, but they don't let me loose on the ministers here. I think they're afraid of what might happen here. But we do not allow people, our folks, to come in and say, well, David, you're thinking the wrong thing. Here's the problem. But we do create a safe space to explore. And frequently that safe space is at end of life or serious illness.
That's fascinating, Keith. I've got to go back to something you mentioned yesterday, though, that you said that even though you have this belief that and the strong sense of ethics that when you go into a room, you are there to minister to the people and not to focus on one aspect of religion or another. And yet you said that sometimes people can even become combative, and even to the point where you said you feared that you might get beaten up. Now, what's that message?
That's happened a couple of times because you end up representing God, which kind of gives me chills. But for some people, it doesn't take a lot of look at the Pew research on religious statistics to realize that a lot of us are disenfranchised from the religion of our upbringing and maybe second or third generation. And so the concept of God sometimes comes back into play at a time of crisis. And I will sanitizing both for to take out the expletives and enough information to understand who it is. At 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're the chaplain on call, nothing good happens at 2 o'clock in the morning. No one ever calls and says, great news. And so I ended up in a space where a man found out that he had lost his son, his only living relative, his daughter-in-law, and his grandchild in a single car accident, all dead, sitting there with a state trooper. They said, by the way, we do have one bit of good news. Your other grandchild is fine. He didn't have another grandchild. And there's a story there that I can't share, but that this person was not related. So he had lost everybody. He was drunk. He was at least 6'5", and probably outweighed me by about 50 pounds. The state trooper left, and this man got in my face and put a finger in my chest, saying, why would God let this happen? And boy, you better tell me why right now. Now, we all have different techniques in those situations. And I was, of course, wishing that the state trooper were still in the room, to be frank with you, because I was physically afraid. But I gave him the answer that I give patients that, by the way, some medical people hate this answer. I said, I don't know. And he pulled his head back. I could have lied to him, but I think that man would have known that I lied to him. I could have done when God closes a door, a window opens. By the way, we tend to say these things to patients because it helps us. I don't think it helps. It helps our patients. And I said, I see so many people in horrible situations in what I do. I have lots of questions that I hope one day to be answered. But I've come to realize that I can feel and experience God in the questions and in these bad times. And that's what I can offer you today. And we sat for over an hour, and he talked about his family. And so that, if any of you have ever received an email from me, basically I've found that my happiness, my theological happiness, and the theology that I hope to exude is where is spirituality in the question? And so, if we can agree that we're always going to have questions, we're always going to have bad spots in our life. Forgive, I'm going to be very Christocentric here, so I'll apologize, not apologizing being a Christian minister, but because my job is to be what I call big E ecumenical. But one of my old theology professors, who's since passed away, said, if your Jesus can't be in the hard places, then your Jesus was on water skis in Galilee. So for those of you who know. So I think that that's true of any religion and spirituality, and it is about how do we embrace that sense of, I call it the divine, in these hard spaces. I think that enters into the work that the coalition's trying to do, and it enters into the justice aspect that sometimes I think we forget when it comes to these conversations and these documents. These are documents of love, but they're documents of justice as well. And that justice is helping people have a voice when we might tend to ignore it, or when they may be too ill to express it. Sorry, I didn't mean, I'm not passing around the collection plate today, y'all, but I kind of got into preaching.
No, that's wonderful.
But that's just one instance. I'll be frank with you. There were times I hid behind security when shootings happened. But I have seen some amazing beauty in these hard spaces. And when I look back when I actually got to see patients more actively, the things that stick with me are the hard moments, the putting arms around and hugging a couple whose son in their 20s that had a single motor vehicle accident, and we had walked down to the Blue Stripe as he was donating his organs. To be with them in a cold parking garage and have them spontaneously hug me, realizing that they were getting ready to get in the car and drive hours away, realizing that their only child had died and their life was changed forever. I didn't make it all better, but during that moment, we shared something. We shared a magical space that I will never forget. And still get emotional. And y'all, it's been years. That's been 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Keith. And you're seeing maybe if you're looking at the chat, you're seeing a lot of very, very positive responses there. Catherine had a question she wanted to ask.
So Keith, it's obvious to all of us, I think, right now, how you ended up on a serious illness coalition, because that's what everybody that participates here has their view into this and their interest. We all, I think, understand the complexity of what it's like to live, or empathize with what it's like to live with a serious illness. How can we as a coalition bottle some of what you're just talking about? How can we institutionalize that for not only our own group, but for other people? Where should we be sitting in speaking out about spirituality as part of the serious illness journey?
And forgive me, Chris, you popped something else into my mind, which I hope is okay, and pull me back on task, because for those of you, again, old enough who read Billy and the Family Circus, I am an ADD child who wanders and meanders about, although it usually works out best for me. I know that we've done a lot of good work, and we're talking about changing rules and regulations. I think that we need to remind ourselves of the emotive nature of the work that we do, and the weight that we carry in our individual jobs and as we come together, and the realization that the patient's perspective has to continually be brought up. It's too easy for us. I'm excited about the potential legislative changes. I'm geeked out about them, but I want our legislators to know of the justice and emotional and love aspects of what we're doing. So I'd like to see that reminder. As I mentioned yesterday, I have for 8 years begged for Schwartz rounds here. And for those of you, many of you probably have had Schwartz rounds for years. We are beginning that. I am most concerned about our own spiritual upkeep and how that affects our care of our patients. When I talk to nurses who have had a patient for a year here, a patient who was here for horrific reasons, and they have to see this patient each and every day, knowing that they're not going to get better, dealing with family members with unrealistic expectations, are hiding from the law as well. I think that the burden that's carried there, we ignore to our own peril. We all know about compassion fatigue. We have to do a better job of saying it's okay to be emotional. And Schwartz rounds, for those of you who have them already, you know, are about a safe space where we can talk about the patient or the encounter where we almost quit medicine. Mm-hmm. And when they work well, and it's not a pity party, and it's not M&M. We're not talking about, you know, it's not about which drug we should have used. You'll have someone else who's in the group who said, you know, I thought I was the only one who felt that way. And I think the part of us that you know is around to take care of wounded people needs to embrace our own wounded nature. That's part of who we are as humans. So that may not have answered your question, but that's where I am right now.
No, you answered my question well. And the minute you said the time you almost quit doing what you were doing, I had my flashback and I went right back to that patient. And I bet that a lot of the clinicians or folks that have ministered to someone that for a long period of time had that same experience.
And thinking you're alone, that's it is amazing. When I was in primary care, I would take care of patients in loneliness. I wish I could write a prescription for loneliness. And I would find, a woman who has 4 children and a spouse and still just desperately lonely. I think we can be, even in this, as we like to call the Baptist in Winston-Salem, surrounded by thousands of people, there's still a lot of very lonely employees, lonely in the pain that they carry, thinking they're alone, thinking I'm the only one who has this weakness, when the weakness is part of who we are and needs to be embraced as well.
Keith, you have touched on a very sensitive and delicate spot that I think we need to explore a lot more in this coalition. So I would like to see if maybe we can think some more about that. I'm just reading Deb Love's comment here. Thank you, Keith. Great getting to know you better. I believe the communication skills workshop that Ellie Ward, Dr. Fisher, and I are hoping to offer for PCP settings will help bring deeper connection to seriously ill patients, which is spiritual encounter, even though perhaps unknowingly. And I think that is something as well that we really desperately need in this coalition. So perhaps between everybody that's focused on this, we can do something further in the future, maybe a forum or something even more distinct than that. But I think we're certainly seeing the need, and everybody is so thankful for Keith Steyerwalt. Can we call you our chaplain in the coalition?
You know, I would be honored. I'd be honored. I think out of all the titles that I have, and I'm working on the last one, as David knows, I'm back in school for the last time and hopefully done in August. And then we'll just stay at home and play with my trains. I'll work as well. But chaplain is the one that I think I embrace the most out of all the things that I have done.
Wonderful. Well, this has been an incredible Friday Facts, Keith. Thanks so much for joining us. And we hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you all for your comments.
Thanks, Keith.